Stella Carter lived in a modest apartment in Chicago's uptown, where the city's pulse mingled with the hum of distant traffic and the occasional wail of sirens. At 38, she was a single mother and a nurse's aide at a community clinic, her days filled with the quiet rhythm of routine, checking vitals, soothing patients, and rushing home to her 12-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan was her heart, a lanky boy with a quick laugh, a passion for sketching cityscapes, and a habit of humming old rock tunes he'd picked up from Stella's vinyl collection. His father, David, had vanished when Ethan was 4, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and a half-empty closet. Stella didn't dwell on it. She'd learned early that love was a gamble, and her family's history taught her to play it safe. Her roots were tangled in Chicago's industrial underbelly. Stella's grandfather, Walter, had worked at a now-shuttered chemical plant in Cicero, mixing solvents that stained his hands blue and left a metallic tang in the air of their old row house. The plant had been a lifeline for working-class families until the 90s, when lawsuits exposed its toxic dumping into the Chicago River. Walter died of lung cancer before the settlements came, whispering on his deathbed about something in the water. Stella's mother, Ruth, followed a decade later, her throat ravaged by what doctors called esophageal cancer. But Stella remembered the oddities: Ruth's neck swelling unnaturally, her voice turning gravelly, and a strange odor like rusted iron that clung to her in her final months. Family whispers hinted at more: growths that puzzled doctors, a biopsy report that vanished from records. Stella buried those memories, focusing on Ethan, determined to shield him from the shadows of their lineage. That September morning in 2025, the apartment smelled of brewed coffee and damp plaster, the windows fogged from a late summer rain. Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, his dark hair a mess. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, grabbing a bowl of cereal. Stella was packing his lunch when he cleared his throat with a wince. "Throat's kinda sore," he said, tilting his head. She glanced over, her nurse's instincts kicking in. "Let me check." In the dim light of the kitchen, she saw it, a small red bump at the back of Ethan's throat, near his tonsils, no bigger than a pea. It looked like irritation, maybe from shouting at his weekend basketball game in Grant Park. But when she touched his neck, the skin felt fever-hot, and beneath it, a faint hardness pulsed, like a seed lodged under the flesh. "Just a sore throat, probably," Stella said, forcing a smile. "We'll gargle with salt water tonight." Ethan nodded, unfazed, and grabbed his backpack. But as he swallowed his orange juice, Stella caught a fleeting grimace, and the air carried a faint, unnatural scent, like heated copper. Her stomach tightened. She'd seen enough at the clinic to know most symptoms were benign, but Ruth's illness flashed in her mind, those early days when her mother dismissed a scratchy throat until it consumed her. The commute to the clinic was a blur of crowded L trains, the air thick with the smell of wet coats and exhaust. Stella's mind churned. Her family's history wasn't just tragedy, it was a warning. The Cicero plant had poisoned the river, and studies linked it to higher cancer rates in the neighborhood. Was this Ethan's legacy, a genetic scar from her grandfather's work? At the clinic, between patients, she confided in her coworker, Maria. "Ethan's got a bump in his throat." "Probably nothing, right?" Maria, a mother of 3, shrugged. "Kids get weird bugs. But with your family history, get it checked. My cousin grew up near that plant. Same story, weird illnesses." Stella nodded, her unease growing. The clinic's fluorescent lights buzzed, casting stark shadows that seemed to writhe in the corners. After work, Stella picked Ethan up from school. He was quieter, scratching his neck absent-mindedly. "It's itchy now," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. At home, the apartment felt stifling, the rain's patter against the windows amplifying the silence. Stella cooked mac and cheese, Ethan's favorite, but he picked at it, wincing when he swallowed. "Does it hurt?" she asked, inspecting the bump again. It had grown slightly, the skin taut and glossy, like a blister ready to burst. When she pressed gently, Ethan flinched, and a tiny bead of clear fluid oozed out, carrying a sharp, chemical smell, like burning plastic. Stella's heart raced. "We'll see Dr. Patel tomorrow," she said, her voice steady despite the panic clawing at her chest. Evening brought a call from her sister, Claire, who lived in Milwaukee. "You sound off," Claire said. "What's up?" Stella hesitated, then spilled. "Ethan's got this thing in his throat. Like Mom's." Claire went quiet. "Dad always said the plant did something to us. He signed some hush money deal," remember? Said it wasn't just cancer with Mom. There was a doctor who thought it was unnatural. Then he quit. Stella's skin prickled. She'd heard the rumors, a biopsy showing unknown tissue, a hospital cover-up. Was it paranoia, or truth buried under corporate greed? Bedtime came, and Stella tucked Ethan in, reading him a chapter from his favorite comic. The room felt heavy, the city's glow casting eerie shadows through the blinds. As Ethan drifted off, Stella lingered, watching his chest rise and fall. The bump seemed larger in the dim light, its edges faintly pulsing. She chalked it up to her imagination, but the air held that metallic tang, stronger now, mingling with the damp scent of the apartment. Her own throat itched faintly, a psychosomatic echo of her fear. Sleep eluded her. Stella sat up, scrolling through old family photos on her phone. Ruth smiling at a picnic, her neck unblemished, Walter in his factory overalls, the river behind him glinting under a gray sky. The environmental cost of Chicago's industrial boom weighed on her. Working-class families like hers had paid the price for progress, their bodies collateral damage. Was Ethan's bump a random illness, or a reckoning for her family's silence? At 2 a.m., a sound woke her, a soft, crackling whisper, like dry leaves underfoot, coming from Ethan's room. Heart pounding, she crept down the hall. Ethan was asleep, his hand on his neck. In the moonlight, the bump seemed to shift, a subtle ripple beneath the skin, as if something inside was stirring, testing its confines. The air grew thick, the metallic odor now laced with a faint rot, like earth after a storm. Stella's breath caught. What if this wasn't just a sore throat? What if it was alive, a legacy of poison seeping through their blood, waiting to claim another generation? Stella Carter's days had always been anchored by routine, but now they felt like a tightrope walk over a growing abyss. The bump in Ethan's throat, once a small irritation, had swelled to the size of a walnut, its surface red and glossy, radiating an unnatural heat that made his neck sweat even in the chilly Chicago autumn. The apartment in Uptown, with its peeling wallpaper and faint smell of damp plaster, seemed to close in around them. The metallic odor that had started faintly the previous week now clung to Ethan like a shadow, sharp and chemical, like a spilled solvent left to fester. Stella, a nurse's aide accustomed to soothing patients' fears, found herself battling her own. Every glance at Ethan's neck sent her mind spiraling to her mother Ruth's final months, when a similar swelling had stolen her voice and then her life. Ethan, at 12, was still trying to be the carefree kid who sketched cityscapes and hummed Nirvana tunes, but the discomfort was wearing him down. "It itches bad, Mom," he said at breakfast, his voice hoarse as he pushed his cereal around the bowl. Stella's heart sank. The bump had grown overnight, the skin so taut it looked ready to split. When she touched it gently, Ethan winced, and a bead of sticky yellowish fluid oozed out, carrying a stench like burned plastic mixed with something organic, like rotting fruit. "We're going to the doctor today," she said, her tone firm to mask her panic. Ethan nodded, but his eyes, usually bright with mischief, were clouded with unease. The pediatric clinic in the Loop was a sterile contrast to their cluttered apartment, its walls lined with faded posters of smiling children. Dr. Patel, a harried but kind pediatrician, examined Ethan's throat with a penlight. "Looks like a possible lymph node infection, maybe strep or an abscess," he said, his brow furrowing as he pressed the lump. Ethan yelped, and a small trickle of that foul fluid seeped out, making the doctor recoil slightly. "That's unusual. The smell suggests infection. Let's do a swab and start antibiotics." Stella nodded, but her nurse's instinct screamed, this wasn't strep. The hardness under the skin, the way it seemed to pulse independently, echoed Ruth's symptoms too closely. "Any family history of throat issues?" Dr. Patel asked. Stella hesitated, then said, "My mother had cancer. But it started like this." The doctor's eyes softened. "We'll run tests. Don't worry yet." Back home, the apartment felt suffocating, the rain outside turning the windows into smeared lenses that distorted the gray cityscape. Ethan took the antibiotics, but the lump seemed to mock the medicine, growing larger by the hour. Stella bandaged it to catch the oozing fluid, but the dressing soaked through quickly, the smell now so potent it lingered on her hands even after washing. She caught Ethan staring at himself in the bathroom mirror, his fingers hovering over the lump. "It feels like something's moving inside," he whispered, his voice trembling. Stella hugged him tightly, her own throat tightening with fear. "It's just swelling, buddy. The medicine will help. But her words felt hollow, like a lie told to a dying patient. At work, Stella's focus frayed. The clinic's bustle, patients coughing, phones ringing, felt like a mockery of her growing dread. Maria, her co-worker, noticed her distraction. "You okay, Stella? You look like you've seen a ghost." Stella forced a smile. "Ethan's sick. The doctor says it's an infection, but—" She trailed off, unable to voice the fear that it was something more, something tied to her family's poison past. Maria frowned. "You grew up near that Cicero plant, right? My uncle worked there. Said the chemicals did weird things to people. Rashes, growths. Get a second opinion." Stella nodded, the weight of her heritage pressing harder. The Cicero plant had been a silent killer, its toxins seeping into the river and the bodies of families like hers. Socially, it was a grim reminder. Working-class communities bore the brunt of industrial greed, their health sacrificed for profit, their complaints dismissed as hysteria. That evening, Stella called her sister Claire again. "It's getting worse," she admitted, describing the lump's growth and the smell. Claire's voice was sharp with worry. "Stella, you need to push the doctors. Mom's thing wasn't just cancer. I found Dad's old papers once. A settlement letter mentioned mutagenic exposure. He never talked about it, but he blamed himself for staying at that plant." Stella's breath caught. Mutagenic? Was this a genetic scar, a mutation passed down through their bloodline, triggered by the toxins her grandfather and father had worked with? The family secret felt like a betrayal, a silence that had cost Ruth her life and now threatened Ethan. Ethan's social world began to shrink. He skipped basketball practice, embarrassed by the bandage on his neck and the smell he couldn't hide. "What if the guys see it?" he asked, his voice small. Stella's heart broke. She knew the sting of being different in a city that judged quickly. She canceled a coffee date with a coworker, avoiding questions about Ethan's health. The isolation was creeping in, mirroring her own childhood after Ruth's diagnosis, when neighbors stopped visiting, wary of the sick house. Stella's love for Ethan was fierce, but so was her shame. Had she failed him by staying in Chicago, surrounded by the ghosts of its polluted past? The apartment's atmosphere grew oppressive. The rain never stopped, its patter a constant drone that amplified the silence between words. The walls seemed to sweat, the damp smell mingling with the chemical stench from Ethan's neck. At night, Stella sat by his bed, watching him sleep. The lump was grotesque now, the size of a golf ball, its surface veined with thin, dark lines that seemed to shift under the skin. She swore she heard a faint hum, like a distant machine, emanating from it. Her own throat itched faintly, a psychosomatic echo of her fear, but she dismissed it as stress. Desperate for answers, Stella dug through old family boxes in the closet, finding a faded photo of Ruth, her neck unblemished, smiling by the river. Tucked behind it was a yellow document, a settlement from the Cicero plant, admitting potential health impacts, but denying liability. Her father had signed it for $12,000, enough to cover Ruth's medical bills but not her pain. Was this the source? A toxin that altered their DNA, lying dormant until it struck Ethan? The thought was a knife. Her love for him was boundless. But what if her family's silence had doomed him? As bedtime approached, Stella read Ethan a story, her voice steady despite the dread coiling in her gut. The city's glow filtered through the blinds, casting shadows that danced unnaturally, like fingers reaching for Ethan's neck. The metallic smell was overpowering now, laced with a sickly sweetness that made her gag. She tucked him in, kissing his forehead, but her fingers lingered on the lump. It felt alive, pulsing in a rhythm that didn't match Ethan's heartbeat. In the dead of night, Stella woke to a sound, a low, guttural hum, like a whisper trapped in static, coming from Ethan's room. Heart pounding, she crept down the hall. Ethan was asleep, his hand clutching the bandage. In the moonlight, the lump seemed to writhe, the dark lines beneath the skin twisting like veins forming a word. As Stella leaned closer, her blood ran cold. The hum sharpened into a faint, unmistakable sound, a whisper, soft and deliberate, murmuring "Ethan," in a voice that wasn't human. Stella Carter's world was unraveling, thread by thread, as the thing in Ethan's throat grew beyond comprehension. The lump, once a small irritation, had morphed into a grotesque mass the size of a plum, its surface cracked and oozing a viscous, yellowish pus that carried a stench of rusted metal and decay. The skin around it was stretched thin, veined with dark, thread-like tendrils that seemed to pulse independently, as if alive. Ethan, her 12-year-old son, was no longer the vibrant boy who sketched Chicago's skyline or hummed along to old records. His voice was a rasp, each swallow a wince of pain, and his eyes carried a haunted look that broke Stella's heart. The uptown apartment, once a cozy refuge, now felt like a tomb, its damp walls and flickering lights amplifying the dread that clung to every moment. Stella had barely slept since the whisper in the night, a chilling murmur of Ethan's name that seemed to come from the lump itself. She tried to dismiss it as a hallucination born of stress, but the memory lingered, sharp as a blade. The antibiotics prescribed by Dr. Patel were useless. The lump grew defiantly, and the swab results came back negative for strep or any common infection. It might be a cyst, Dr. Patel said during a follow-up visit. His tone clipped as he examined Ethan's throat. "We'll schedule an ultrasound." But when he pressed the mass, Ethan cried out, and a spurt of pus hit the examination table, sizzling faintly as it pooled. The doctor's face paled, the chemical stench filling the room. "That's not typical," he muttered, ordering blood tests and a referral to a specialist. Stella's nurse's instincts screamed. This was no cyst. It was something unnatural, tied to the toxic legacy of her family's past in Chicago's industrial shadow. Back home, the apartment was a claustrophobic nightmare. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with humidity, and the metallic odor from Ethan's neck permeated everything, mixing with the apartment's damp musk to create a miasma that made Stella's stomach churn. She bandaged the lump obsessively, but the dressing soaked through within hours, the pus leaving burn-like marks on Ethan's skin. "It hurts, Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's like something's crawling inside." Stella held him, her hands trembling, but the lump's heat seared through the bandage, and she swore she felt it shift under her touch, like a muscle flexing. She tried over-the-counter creams, hoping to soothe the inflammation, but they only made the skin crack further, revealing glimpses of fibrous, writhing strands beneath, black and glistening, like worms trapped in a wound. Ethan's condition was eroding his spirit. He refused to go to school, terrified of his friends seeing the bandage or smelling the decay. "They'll think I'm a freak," he said, tears welling as he hid in his room. Stella's heart ached. She knew the cruelty of kids, the way they shunned anything wrong. She canceled his basketball practices and lied to his coach, claiming a bad flu. Socially, their world shrank. Stella avoided calls from coworkers, fearing their questions, and even Maria, her closest friend to the clinic, got only vague updates. "He's still sick," Stella texted, dodging Maria's offer to visit. The isolation mirrored her childhood after her mother Ruth's diagnosis, when neighbors stopped coming by, whispering about bad blood from the Cicero plant. That plant, where her grandfather Walter and father Robert had worked, loomed large, a symbol of corporate greed that poisoned working-class families like hers, leaving them to suffer in silence. Stella's guilt was a crushing weight. Had she doomed Ethan by staying in Chicago, surrounded by the ghosts of its polluted past? She dug deeper into her family's history, pulling out old letters from the closet. One, from her father to Ruth, hinted at a cover-up. "The plant knew the chemicals were bad, but they paid us to stay quiet. I'm sorry, Ruthie." Another was a medical report from Ruth's final months, mentioning unidentified tissue growth that baffled doctors before they settled on cancer. Was this what Ethan had inherited, a mutation from the toxins that had seeped into the Chicago River, altering their DNA? The social commentary was bitter. Families like hers, scraping by in industrial neighborhoods, were disposable to the corporations that profited from their labor and left them with poisoned bodies. Psychologically, Stella was fraying. She saw Ethan's suffering as a mirror of her own failures, her inability to protect him, her choice to stay in a city built on toxic foundations. Nightmares plagued her. Ruth's face, her throat bulging with growths that whispered Stella's name, or Ethan's neck splitting open to reveal a writhing mass of tendrils. She woke sweating, her own throat itching faintly, a phantom echo of Ethan's pain. The thought of losing him was unbearable, yet darker thoughts crept in. Would it be kinder to end his suffering? She banished them, clinging to love and the faint hope of a cure. The apartment's atmosphere grew surreal. The walls seemed to pulse with moisture, the shadows cast by streetlights twisting into shapes that lingered too long. The city outside was no better. Chicago's gray skies felt oppressive, the L train screech sounding like a scream. At night, the metallic stench was joined by a low hum, like a distant generator, emanating from Ethan's room. Stella tried to stay rational, but the lump's behavior defied logic. It wasn't just growing, it was changing, the tendrils beneath the skin forming patterns that looked almost deliberate, like veins spelling out a message she couldn't read. Desperate, Stella took Ethan to the specialist, an ENT at Northwestern Memorial. Dr. Kessler, a stern woman with gray streaks in her hair, ordered an ultrasound. The machine's hum filled the room as the technician frowned at the screen. "It's irregular," she said, pointing to a mass with shifting, fibrous structures. "It's not a typical cyst. We need a biopsy." Stella's stomach dropped. The procedure was scheduled for the next day, but that night, Ethan's pain worsened. He could barely speak, gagging as if the lump was pressing inward, choking him. Stella sat by his bed, holding his hand, her love for him a lifeline against despair. "We'll fix this, buddy," she whispered, but her voice cracked. As midnight approached, the apartment was silent save for the hum from Ethan's throat. Stella dozed in a chair beside him, exhausted. A sudden gasp woke her. Ethan was sitting up, eyes wide with terror, clutching his neck. "Mom, it's moving," he rasped. She flicked on the lamp, heart pounding, and peeled back the bandage. The lump had split open. The skin parting like a torn seemed to reveal a glistening, pulsating mass. Within it, nestled among the writhing tendrils, was a small, wet orb, glassy and unblinking, like an eye staring directly at her. The air filled with a sharp, metallic scream, not from Ethan, but from the thing itself, echoing in the dark. Stella Carter's life had become a waking nightmare, each moment saturated with the grotesque reality of Ethan's condition. The lump in her 12-year-old son's throat was no longer a mere anomaly. It was a monstrosity, a pulsating tumor that had grown to the size of a small fist, splitting the skin of his neck to reveal a writhing mass of black, fibrous tendrils that glistened like wet ink. The air in their uptown Chicago apartment was thick with a stench of rusted iron and rotting flesh, so potent it clung to the walls, seeping into the damp plaster and making every breath a struggle. Ethan, once a vibrant boy who filled their home with sketches and music, was now a shadow, pale, weak, his voice reduced to a pained whisper. His eyes, wide with fear, reflected a question Stella couldn't answer. "What is happening to me?" The nightmarish eye-like orb in the lump, glimpsed in the previous night's horror, haunted Stella. She hadn't told Ethan what she'd seen, terrified it would break him. Instead, she'd rebandaged the mass, her hands shaking as the tendrils seemed to recoil from her touch, curling inward like living things. The biopsy at Northwestern Memorial was scheduled for the next morning, but Stella felt time slipping away. The apartment, once a sanctuary, was now a prison of dread. The city outside, with its gray skies and relentless hum of traffic, seemed to pulse and sync with the thing in Ethan's throat, as if Chicago itself was complicit in their suffering. Stella's mind churned with memories of her family's toxic legacy. Her grandfather Walter and father Robert had worked at the Cicero chemical plant, its toxins dumped into the Chicago River, poisoning generations. Her mother Ruth's death, officially throat cancer, had been marked by similar growths, bulges that seemed to move, a metallic odor that lingered. A family secret loomed. Walter had signed a settlement, silencing claims of mutagenic exposure, for a payout that barely covered Ruth's hospital bills. Stella found a crumpled letter in her father's old files, his scrawl confessing guilt. "I knew the chemicals were bad, but we needed the money." "Forgive me, Ruth." Was this Ethan's inheritance, a mutation triggered by decades-old poison, a curse that had lain dormant until now? At the hospital, the biopsy room was sterile, its fluorescent lights harsh against the surreal horror of Ethan's condition. Dr. Kessler, the ENT specialist, frowned as she prepped for the procedure. "This is highly unusual," she said, her voice clinical but strained. The ultrasound had shown a mass with fibrous, motile structures, defying medical logic. As the needle pierced the lump, Ethan screamed, a sound that tore through Stella's soul. The syringe filled with a black, viscous fluid that shimmered unnaturally, emitting a stench like burning rubber and decay. The technician gagged, and Dr. Kessler's hands trembled as she sealed the sample. "We'll rush this to pathology," she said, avoiding Stella's eyes. "It's not like anything I've seen." Back home, Ethan could barely move. The lump had grown post-biopsy, tendrils now visible beneath the cracked skin, spreading like roots across his neck. He couldn't eat solids, gagging on even water, as if the mass was pressing inward, choking his throat. Stella blended soups, her hands stained with the chemical reek of the pus that soaked through his bandages. "I'm scared, Mom," Ethan whispered, his voice a faint croak. "It feels like it's taking me over." Stella held him, her love a fierce anchor. But her own throat itched persistently now, a mirror of his pain she refused to acknowledge. Socially, they were ghosts. Stella had quit her job at the clinic, unable to juggle work and Ethan's care. Maria called, but Stella dodged her, ashamed of the smell that followed them, the visible deformity Ethan hid under scarves. His friends stopped texting, sensing his withdrawal. The isolation echoed Stella's childhood, when Ruth's illness turned their home into a pariah's den. Socially, it was a stark commentary. Working-class families, ravaged by industrial fallout, were left to rot in silence, their suffering ignored by a city that thrived on their labor. The apartment's atmosphere was surreal, oppressive. The walls seemed to weep moisture, the damp mixing with the lump stench to create a suffocating haze. Shadows cast by streetlights twisted into grotesque shapes, mimicking the tendrils in Ethan's neck. Sounds were wrong. The L-train's rumble carried a low, guttural hum, like a voice trapped in static. Stella's nightmares grew vivid, Ruth's throat splitting open to reveal a writhing mass, whispering, "It's in you too." She woke gasping, her own throat burning, but she dismissed it as stress, focusing on Ethan. Desperate, Stella tried to fight the thing herself. Late at night, with Ethan asleep, she took scissors to a tendril protruding from the cracked skin. The moment she cut, Ethan jolted awake, screaming as black ichor sprayed, sizzling on the floor like acid. The tendril writhed, curling around the blade before retreating into the wound. Stella dropped the scissors, her hands burning where the ichor touched, leaving red welts. The lump pulsed faster, as if enraged, and the air filled with a low, guttural hum that formed words. "You can't stop it!" Stella froze, her blood cold. Was it alive? A parasite born of the Cicero plant's toxins, or something older, a punishment for her family's silence? Psychologically, Stella teetered on the edge. Ethan's suffering was her failure. She'd stayed in Chicago, ignoring the warnings of her family's past. The lump was a metaphor for her guilt, a physical manifestation of the shame she carried for not escaping the city's poisoned legacy. She thought of ending it, herself, even Ethan, to spare him pain, but love stopped her. She clung to the hope of the biopsy results, though dread whispered they'd offer no answers. The city outside was a mirror of their decay. The Chicago River, visible from their window, glinted under sodium lights, its surface oily and wrong. A crow perched on the sill, staring at Ethan's room, its eyes reflecting the lump's glassy orb. The apartment's hum grew louder, sinking with Ethan's shallow breaths. Stella sat by his bed, holding his hand, her own throat now raw, a faint hardness forming beneath her skin. She ignored it, focusing on Ethan's labored breathing. As dawn broke, gray and heavy, Ethan stirred, his eyes glassy with pain. "Mom," he rasped, pointing to the mirror across the room. Stella turned, her heart stopping. In the reflection, Ethan's neck was a mass of tendrils, but her own face stared back. Not hers, but something else, its throat bulging with a dark, pulsing growth that mirrored his. The mirror seemed to ripple, and from Ethan's lump came a clear, deliberate whisper. "We are one. It might not be a cure. It's alive in a way. You can't just cut it out without consequences." The surgery was scheduled at Northwestern, a last-ditch effort. Stella sat in the waiting room, the antiseptic smell of the hospital clashing with the memory of Ethan's chemical stench. The room was too bright, the walls too white, yet shadows seemed to linger in the corners, twisting like the tendrils in Ethan's neck. She clutched a photo of Ethan from last summer, smiling at Wrigley Field, his neck unblemished. Her love for him was a fire, burning through her guilt and fear. She had stayed in Chicago, ignoring her family's toxic legacy, and now Ethan paid the price. The Cicero plant's sins, corporate greed poisoning working-class lives, felt like a personal betrayal. Her grandfather Walter's silence, her father Robert's complicity in the cover-up, had led to this moment. Socially, it was a grim indictment. Families like hers were collateral damage, their bodies battlegrounds for industrial fallout, their suffering buried under corporate payouts. The surgery lasted 4 hours. Dr. Kessler emerged, her face pale. "We removed the mass," she said, "but it reacted. It burst during extraction, releasing a black vapor that smelled like burning plastic. We've sent samples to a lab, but the tissue was unlike anything I've seen, fibrous, almost sentient." Ethan was stable, but weak, his neck stitched with angry red scars. Stella sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand, his breathing shallow but steady. The lump was gone, but the scars pulsed faintly, as if the thing's presence lingered. Ethan stirred, his voice a croak. "It's better, Mom. It doesn't hurt as much." Stella's heart lifted, a flicker of hope amid the dread. She kissed his forehead, tears falling. "You're so strong, buddy. We're going to be okay." Back home, the apartment felt lighter, the metallic stench fading, though a faint damp rot lingered in the air. Ethan regained strength, eating soft foods and sketching again, his smile a fragile gift. Stella returned to work, her co-workers offering cautious support. Maria hugged her. "He's a fighter like you." But Stella felt like an imposter. Her own throat itched persistently, a small hardness forming beneath the skin. She avoided mirrors, terrified of what she might see. The city outside was less oppressive, the Chicago River glinting under rare sunlight, but its oily surface reminded her of the ichor from Ethan's lump. The crow that had perched on their sill was gone, but its absence felt ominous, as if it had seen enough. Voss called with lab results. The tissue showed traces of organometallic compounds, relics of the Cicero plant's waste. "It's not cancer, but a mutation, possibly triggered by environmental exposure across generations. Ethan's clean for now, but watch for recurrence." Stella nodded, her throat tightening. The hope was intoxicating, but fragile. She and Ethan laughed over dinner, a rare moment of normalcy, but the apartment's shadows seemed to watch, the walls still damp, the air carrying a faint hum that might have been the city, or something else. Psychologically, Stella was torn between relief and paranoia. Ethan's recovery was a miracle, but the thing had felt alive, whispering, reacting. Was it truly gone, or had it retreated, waiting? Her own symptoms, itch, hardness, hinted at a shared fate, a family curse rooted in poisoned water and silenced truths. Love kept her going, Ethan's resilience, their bond, but fear gnawed at her. The social weight was heavy. Working-class families, betrayed by corporations, carried scars no one else saw. That night, Stella tucked Ethan in, his scars fading but visible. The apartment was quiet, the city's glow soft through the blinds. She felt a flicker of peace, a belief they might heal. But as she turned off the light, a new sensation stopped her, a faint, crawling itch in her throat, sharper than before. She stepped into the bathroom, heart pounding, and faced the mirror. Under her jaw, a small red bump pulsed, its surface veined with thin, dark lines that seemed to writhe in the dim light, whispering her name in a voice that wasn't hers. Stella Carter stood on the precipice of a new reality, her world reshaped by the horror that had gripped her son Ethan and now threatened her own body. The surgery at Northwestern Memorial had removed the grotesque mass from Ethan's throat, leaving behind jagged scars that traced his neck like a map of their ordeal. At 12, Ethan was slowly reclaiming pieces of himself. His sketches of Chicago's skyline reappeared on the fridge. His laughter, though faint, echoed in their uptown apartment. Yet, the air remained heavy, laced with a faint rot that clung to the damp walls, a reminder of the thing that had nearly consumed him. Stella, at 38, felt the weight of her family's toxic legacy pressing harder than ever. The small, red bump in her own throat, pulsing with thin, dark tendrils, was a silent accusation, a sign that the curse born of the Cicero chemical plants poisons had not let them go. The apartment, once a haven, was now a liminal space, its atmosphere quiet but charged with unease. The metallic stench that had defined Ethan's illness had faded, but the damp, earthy rot persisted, as if the walls themselves wept for their suffering. Stella had returned to work at the clinic, her co-workers offering cautious smiles, sensing the fragility beneath her forced normalcy. Ethan went back to school, his scars hidden under high-collared shirts, but he moved cautiously, as if expecting the pain to return. Stella watched him like a hawk, her love a fierce shield against the fear that gnawed at her. Every night, she checked his neck, her fingers trembling over the scars, which pulsed faintly under the skin, a subtle reminder that the thing might not be gone. Dr. Helen Voss, the toxicologist, had become a reluctant ally. Her final report on Ethan's tissue samples was chilling. The organometallic compounds suggest a mutagenic response, likely triggered by multigenerational exposure to the Cicero plant's waste. The tissue exhibited protosentient behavior, movement, adaptation. It's not alive in a traditional sense, but it's not inert. Voss warned Stella to monitor Ethan closely and to watch herself, given the new bump in her throat. "It's in your bloodline," she said, her voice heavy. The plant's legacy isn't just physical. It's a violation of your family's right to exist without fear. The social commentary was stark. Working-class families like Stella's, poisoned by corporate greed, were left to battle monsters no one else acknowledged, their pain dismissed as collateral damage in Chicago's industrial rise. Stella's psychological state was a tightrope. Love for Ethan anchored her. She'd sacrificed her savings, her job stability, her peace to save him. His resilience, his small smiles as he sketched the Chicago River under a hopeful sun, gave her strength. But the bump in her throat grew, its itch now a burning crawl, and the tendrils beneath her skin seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Nightmares plagued her. Ruth's throat splitting open to whisper warnings, Ethan's scars blooming into new growths, her own reflection morphing into a creature of writhing fibers. The family secret, her grandfather Walter's silence, her father Robert's complicity in the plant's cover-up, felt like a betrayal she could never atone for. Was this her punishment, or Ethan's? The guilt was crushing, but so was her determination to protect him, even as her own body betrayed her. She tried to reclaim normalcy. They went to a Cubs game, Ethan cheering despite his hoarse voice, the crowd's roar a temporary balm. Stella laughed with him, savoring the fleeting joy, but the itch in her throat flared, and she caught herself avoiding mirrors, terrified of what she'd see. The city outside was a paradox. Chicago's glittering skyline a testament to progress, its river oily with the ghosts of industrial sin. The apartment's atmosphere remained wrong. The walls seemed to sweat, the shadows cast by streetlights too sharp, too alive. A low hum, like the one from Ethan's lump, lingered in the air, faint but persistent, as if the thing had left echoes in their home. Stella confided in her sister Claire, who urged her to leave Chicago. "Get out, Stella. That city's poison." But Stella couldn't. She was tied to it, to the memories of Ruth, to the hope that Ethan could have a life free of fear. She saw a doctor for her own throat, but the ultrasound was inconclusive, showing irregular tissue that baffled the technician. "It's probably benign," the doctor said, but his eyes avoided hers, echoing the dismissal her mother had faced. Stella refused a biopsy, terrified it would awaken whatever lurked within her. Instead, she leaned into Ethan, helping him with homework, reading comics together, their bond a fragile light in the dark. One evening, as autumn leaves fell outside, Stella sat by Ethan's bed, watching him sleep. His scars were fading, his breathing steady, but the air carried that faint hum, like a distant whisper. She felt her own throat, the bump now the size of a grape, its tendrils spreading beneath her skin. She'd accepted it, not as defeat, but as sacrifice. If the curse wanted her, it could have her, as long as Ethan was spared. Love had carried them through, his courage, her resolve, and it would carry them forward, even if the shadow remained. As she turned off the light, the apartment fell silent, the city's glow soft through the blinds. Stella lay down, her throat burning, and closed her eyes. A faint crackle, like dry leaves underfoot, came from within her chest, a reminder of the thing that might never leave. Outside, the Chicago River flowed, its surface glinting under the moon, dark and unknowable. Was the curse truly gone, or had it merely shifted, waiting in her blood? The question hung unanswered, a quiet terror beneath the hope, for the reader to reflect on. What if your body carried the sins of those before you, a legacy of poison you could neither see nor escape? Could you face the uncertainty of a disease that feels alive, whispering your name in the dark? Is the price of progress, cities built on the backs of families like Stella's, worth the silent suffering it leaves behind?